Welcome back into the Red Zone podcast. My name is Colten Bartholomew, Badgers football beat reporter here for the Wisconsin State Journal. I am solo right now for this intro, but soon I'm going to be joined by Jim Polzin, columnist here for the State Journal, and Professor Matt Mitten from Marquette University. He's going to tell us all about name, image, and likeness. This is a pretty monumental day in college sports with name, image, and likeness becoming allowed across the nation. We're going to talk about the history of kind of the moving parts that led to this, some of the important cases that you need to understand that led up to here, and then some of the challenges that are going to be facing both student athletes and universities in this time. Professor Mitten does a great job explaining all that. He's a sports law professor at Marquette. This is really kind of his wheelhouse, where he's studied all of these intersections between sports and the law and antitrust suits and all this stuff. So a ton of great information coming your guys' way here in the podcast today. And stick around after our interview with Professor Mitten, because Jim and I kind of wrap that up, talk a little bit about Barry Alvarez's last day and some of the stories that we've written about him here at the State Journal the last couple of weeks. And then we talk a little bit about football recruiting at the end. And then we say goodbye to Jim for a little while because he's going to be going on vacation. So a ton of great stuff coming your way on this podcast. We're going to start it all right after this. All right, we are back with Jim Polzin and Professor Matt Mitten of Marquette University. Professor Matt is a sports law professor and teaches a whole bunch of classes at Marquette and has written all kinds of papers and journal reviews and everything like that about sports law and the NCAA and a lot of stuff that's been going on in the news right now, and things that are changing pretty rapidly with college sports, with NIL starting up on Thursday. So first, Matt, thank you very much for joining the show.
Sure, my pleasure.
Yeah. And, I kind of mentioned it right there, but I'm sure this is a busy time for you. Kind of your worlds are all kind of colliding with college sports, going through all these changes and law and all this kind of stuff kind of meeting at one point right now.
Yeah. In the college sports world, this is all of the sand going through the proverbial hourglass at exactly the same time. So you had the Supreme Court's Alston decision, which is the first time the Supreme Court has decided how antitrust law ought to apply to college sports. First time since 1984. NIL rights legislation, unfortunately, Congress didn't get a law enacted by July 1st. So you have 8 different states going into effect. And then the NCAA is, which the NCAA is its member schools, by the way. People tend to forget that. And they've just issued some guidelines that probably going to be approved today for Division I by the board of directors that are going to say, well, if you're in a state that has an NIL rights law, comply with it. But if you're not, and that could be a couple different possibilities. It's like there is a law, but it's not going to become effective for a while yet. It's being considered, or there isn't one. Each school is told, well, come up with your own rules, but here's some broad parameters or guidelines you have to stay within. And then I think the other factor that's really important that gets kind of overlooked is, for the first time, all NCAA intercollegiate athletes are going to be able to transfer schools once as of right without losing eligibility. So that certainly plays into it. Those 3 factors coming, each of them is significant in their own right, but when all 3 of them are coalescing like this, it's going to be really interesting.
Yeah, and I think that has kind of led to some of the changes we've seen, like some of the very established coaches and administrators around college sports are kind of leaving now. And I know in Wisconsin's case, Barry Alvarez was getting ready to leave before all this, but I think it's just interesting to see some of these guys be like, I don't think that I want to be around for these changes.
Yeah, it's going to be an incredible change because, there's a lot of disagreement over the NCAA's, quote, amateurism rules, which have certainly changed over time. So just for a little historical perspective, we go back to 1906, when the NCAA's predecessor was founded. you look at the NCAA's constitution bylaws, and it pretty clearly states we want college athletics to be amateurs, different meaning back then, distinguish it from professional sports. And that has been a core principle of the intercollegiate, NCAA's member schools. And it certainly changed, over time. But it was a clear, bright line rule, the idea of no pay for play. And now there's a pretty strong consensus, even among NCAA schools, that student athletes ought to be able to earn money from licensing their name, image, and likeness rights, or as they're sometimes known as the right of publicity. So these are rights that everyone has. They're created by state law and basically says someone cannot use your name, likeness, any aspect of your persona for commercial purposes without your permission. Right. So the common way is someone couldn't put your face on a box of oatmeal or use your name to sell beer or something without that. So those are rights that everyone has, not just famous people, celebrities, athletes. So the NCAA has taken the approach, kind of a modernization of amateurism rules, so to speak, to say, college athletes, you should have the same rights as basically your classmates have. But they want to maintain the distinction to say, no pay for play. So the income that college athletes would earn would be from third parties. They wouldn't get it from the school. So that's an important distinction. And the other thing is they want to have some guide rails that will make sure that it's not used to provide an undue recruiting advantage. So for example, a school says, hey, you come here, we've got this booster or donor or season ticket holder, and you're going to get this, great summer internship, or, you can make, 6 figures on endorsements. So that has really complicated matters. No one's disputing that college athletes can make fair market value for this. So there's going to be a handful of athletes who are going to probably have 6 figures earning potential, but most It's going to be a fairly small amount. You can imagine what that's going to do in terms of team unity issues. You're the center, you may be getting a couple $100 to appear at the local hardware store, sign autographs, and then the star quarterback's making 6 figures and driving a Porsche. So there's going to be, if you take a football team, you got from the, the superstars who are likely to be first round picks, maybe some Heisman finalists, down to walk-ons of the 100 plus on a team. And it's just going to increase those disparities between college athletes. And I don't know, I hope it doesn't have it's likely to have some adverse effects, but hopefully it doesn't change the games we all have always loved and enjoy watching so much.
Matt, how do you think we got to this point? I remember, I covered for the previous 10 seasons, I covered the Wisconsin men's basketball team. And back in 2014 and 15, Nigel Hayes was a guy that was just starting to find his voice a little bit and start talking about, how he thought things were unfair for athletes. I mean, do you think it's guys like Nigel, who's not going to benefit from this at all, but, kind of got the talk started that, hey, they're looking around and seeing all these administrators and coaches making millions and millions of dollars, and the school is making millions and millions of dollars, and they feel like they're not being compensated enough. Do you think that's kind of the piece that got this going and rolling?
Yeah, it's interesting you mentioned Nigel Hayes. He's from my hometown, Toledo, Ohio. He went to Toledo Whitmer. I went to Toledo St. John's Jesuit. I, of course, went to school well before he did, but Whitmer was one of our big rivals. Really a powerhouse athletic program. Yeah, I think that's it. In some ways, what has made college sports so popular? What has enabled it to evolve into a multi-billion-dollar industry? It's largely media rights. That's where the bulk of the revenues are generated. So, if we compare it back in 1906, I probably know there were a couple of specific events, like maybe the Harvard-Yale football game, some of those things that were paying for themselves, but it wasn't generating much money. So actually, if we go back to the 1984 Supreme Court decision, which invalidated the NCAA's exclusive college football television rights plan. Up until that point in time, the NCAA sold football television rights for all of its schools across all three divisions. And the reason for that was most schools at the, you had 1,100 member schools at this point in time. And of course, the most popular teams are the ones, and the best teams are, what you'd see in the Power Five conferences. They were been historical powers. And the concern of the other, back in those days, each NCAA member school had one vote. So there were a lot more schools that didn't have really prestigious, popular football programs. And their concern is that if there are too many games televised, people will stay home, for example, and watch Wisconsin, Minnesota, rather than, watching, two of the other, let's say Division III schools in Wisconsin play against each other. That was struck down as an antitrust violation. So what happened after that, you had conferences, because they didn't collectively, each individual conference didn't have what's known as market power, they would sell their television rights. Or certain schools like Notre Dame, they would sell their home games, and they didn't, chose not to join a conference. So then what was happening, the next thing that's important to provide some perspective is the NCAA came up with what's known as a restricted coaches earnings rule. They realized that, it was kind of the athletics arms race. Schools were recognizing if we have excellent athletic programs, it attracts us attention. We get, more students, faculty, donations, all kinds of things. So schools start using athletics as kind of the front porch of their university. And it worked, pretty rational, business decision. And then because of this keep up with the Joneses mentality, they came up with this restricted earnings coaches rule for basketball, which said you could pay your head coach, and I think it was 2 or 3 assistants as much as you wanted. But the fourth coach, you couldn't give them a salary that was more than the value of a graduate assistant or graduate school tuition, $16,000. Well, a lot of these coaches were making $50,000 or $60,000. They said, wait a minute, that's a huge pay cut. They brought an antitrust suit and won, because the idea was, hey, this is price fixing. Schools compete against each other for coaching services, one of the primary inputs to produce sports. But what happened is the way there'd been antitrust suits brought on behalf of student athletes claiming that, wait a minute, you're limiting the value of an athletic scholarship. At that point in time, it was just room, board, tuition, books. It wasn't even the full cost of attendance. But lower federal courts took a very different approach. They said that, well, this is either non-commercial activity, you're just maintaining the distinction between amateur college sports and professional sports, or they said the pro-competitive benefits, maintaining competitive balance, brand differentiation, outweighs any anti-competitive effects as a matter of law. And what happened is this largely arose out of where we're at today, antitrust suits filed out in California, which has the most progressive federal appellate circuit. So first we had the O'Bannon case, which essentially held that, the end result of that is that, well, you can't have a national rule that limits the economic value of a scholarship below full cost of attendance. So there's depending on the school, what is it, maybe 3,000 to maybe 7,000 differential between room, board, tuition, and books. And the court came out of the O'Bannon case, the rule was, well, the NCAA can, limit or prohibit economic compensation that is untethered to education, the cost of education. So this most recent case, Alston, went up to the Supreme Court, involves some challenges to that, because the current rule had been, all right, schools can't provide any more than full cost of attendance scholarship plus reasonable and necessary educational expenses. And there was challenges on the value of postgraduate scholarships, whether there could be cash bonuses or achievement awards on that. Not all the schools can afford that. And that's the part that the Alston court struck down, or basically upheld the lower court's determination that no national limit on the in-kind educational benefits was a less restrictive alternative to the current rule, and a second less restrictive alternative, rather than, no cash, let's say academic achievement benefits, was if it's limited to a little bit less than 6,000. And the court came up with that based on, if you look at all the NCAA rules, it's possible that a student athlete could earn or receive up to that amount for exemplary athletic or academic performance, even though no one really did that. And I do think that, student athlete activism has played a part on it. So it's the media rights, creating the, it's about the only event that we watch live these days. So that gives sports, huge economic value. And, it's only been recently, with the Alston case and some of these decisions coming out of the Ninth Circuit in California, that the thought that courts have taken the approach that, hey, antitrust law applies in the same way to restrictions on, what economic benefits schools can offer for student athletes playing services, just like it does for coaches. So it's really all of those things coming together, which is resulted in where we are today.
Yeah, that's great perspective, because it is kind of, like you said, it's really been a 30 plus year kind of growing toward this. And
yes,
you've seen things kind of chip away at the model of the NCAA. And I think athlete activism, and especially in the social media age where everybody is able to broadcast their opinion, has really changed it.
Oh, yeah.
But I wanted to ask you, why the NCAA has seen all these challenges coming, right? Like they've seen kind of the writing on the wall. Why do you think they went to Congress and said, hey, create a federal law for this NIL and for the changes that are coming, as opposed to creating their own infrastructure and their own kind of rule set like they've done for pretty much everything else?
Well, again, if we step back up until very recently, the Alston case, the applicable judicial precedent indicated that these rules were lawful as a matter of law. And it really wasn't until a couple of weeks ago that the Supreme Court clarified in Alston that the so-called full rule of reason, this three-step analysis, applies to legal challenges to student athlete eligibility rules, particular amateurism. So the NCAA had fairly good reason to believe they were on solid legal ground. And I think there was probably a lot of optimism among, in the NCAA's national office, among conference commissioners and others, that, hey, if the Supreme Court is agreeing to review the Ninth Circuit's Alston decision, the hope was certainly that the current Supreme Court would go back and look at the language in the 1984 Board of Regents decision, where Justice Stevens said, hey, the NCAA should be given ample latitude to maintain the integrity of its product. And of course, that wasn't the case. The 9-0 decision on that. So that's, and the thing with Congress, what's going on there is that when you apply full rule of reason analysis, particularly when the third step is whether there is a substantially less restrictive alternative that can achieve legitimate objectives, which would be maintaining competitive balance in college sports, maintaining the distinction in consumers' mind between college and pro sports. No question, those are accepted justifications. But when you have a judge or a jury deciding on a case-by-case, fact-specific basis, it's very unpredictable how that will come out. So if we look at, that's why the NCAA, again, it's its member schools, they're very reluctant to come up with any rule at the national level, because it's virtually certain to be challenged and you don't know if it will be upheld. And it's very expensive and time consuming to defend antitrust cases. If the plaintiffs win, the relief that they can get is an injunction. The court will enjoin enforcement of the rule. You can get mandatory treble damages, and it's a fee shifting statute. So the defendant in an antitrust case that loses, they're not only paying their own lawyers, but the other side's lawyers. So there's a huge amount at stake there. And so when the NCAA Board of Governors said, we think student athletes should have NIL rights. The NCAA now has a federated rulemaking structure. Each of the 3 divisions makes its own rules. So Board of Governors said, study this, come up with something that works for your members. There's roughly 300 to 350 schools in each division. Come up with that. And what happened is immediately after that was announced, there were 2 antitrust suits filed on behalf of student athletes that said, well, if you're changing your rules now to give student athletes NIL rights, that means that that's basically at least an implicit acknowledgement that not allowing student athletes to earn money from that right is an antitrust violation.
Sure.
So for that reason, it is going to be the Wild West. When I've testified before 2 Senate subcommittees on this over the last year, and I was asked a question a couple of weeks ago by Senator Moran. He says, what happens if we don't have federal NIL rights legislation by July 1? I said, the cat's out of the bag. He goes, how do we put it back in? I said, I don't think you can. So
Yeah,
that's what's going to happen. Yeah, you need to have a uniform rule. You know, it's like student athletes, it shouldn't matter what sport you play or what state, it ought to be the same for everyone. So that's what the NCAA has asked for. And I agree with that. You know, that's the essence of sports. Just like the rules of the game, you got to have the same eligibility rules. And the antitrust exemption of it, it's got 2 components. One is to say, once Congress determines what the scope of these rights are and what any restrictions on NIL rights, there ought not be, that ought to preclude retroactive antitrust legislation or antitrust litigation to say, hey, you know, you violated antitrust law. And then the other thing you have to do is, we know that unfortunately there are going to be some schools, boosters and others, going to try to make an end run around this. Give the NCAA some latitude to enforce its rules. So if Congress has said this is an appropriate restriction, the NCAA needs some latitude to discipline schools that violate that. And that should be immune from antitrust challenge. So they've really wanted just a fairly narrow exemption here, rather than basically saying, hey, we ought not be subject to antitrust law. So for example, baseball has had this rather broad exemption. NCAA is not asking for that. So it's much more, you know, you can tell this is very nuanced. I mean, there's a, you know, it starts sounding very legally complicated, but there's a lot of different pieces to it.
Yeah, you're right. You said the Wild West, Matt. I mean, you're right. That's how coaches feel too. There's chaos right now because they don't know what to tell recruits. They don't know what to tell their players. Here we are a day before July 1st, and there's so much uncertainty. And 8 states have laws in place. Others are moving in that direction. Some states, like Wisconsin, don't even, correct me if I'm wrong, don't even have anything, at least formally moving. And it's just, I don't know when this all gets settled. I mean, this is a tough question, but how do you see this all playing out in the short term and the long term? Do you have a prediction?
The only thing I can predict is unpredictability and uncertainty, quite honestly. So there's, you know, a couple different aspects that are going on. So let's look at what coaches are thinking, or maybe start with student athletes. So student athletes would historically, you know, you're a top high school athlete in what other sport? Where am I going to go to college? Well, you want somewhere where you can get, you know, good academics and, you know, play the sport that you love. And if you get, you know, not all, it's relatively a handful of intercollegiate athletes that have a full ride, so to speak. You know, most it's just partial scholarships for most sports. So the ones who get, you know, it's football, men's basketball, women's basketball, some other sports, they're really fortunate to get the full cost of attendance scholarship. You want to go somewhere where you're going to have a winning team, a chance, you know, if it's a sport where there's a professional league, you can earn some on that. But now you add the other piece. Well, where can I maximize my NIL rights income? So that adds a pretty important piece in a lot of athletes' mind. And of course, coaches, you want to be competitive. It's like, well, we want to be able to offer the same thing, particularly our competitor schools are doing. And then you have the compliance people who are advising everyone as to what you can do and what you can't do. And all there is guide rails. The NCAA, I think, is wisely saying, we don't want to convert this to a pay-for-play model. And the safest course would be for schools to provide as few restrictions as possible on the students' NIL licensing rights. One of the things that I think is crazy, when I was on, testifying before the Senate a couple of weeks ago, Rod Gilmore was saying there shouldn't be any restrictions on student athletes at all. There shouldn't even be education that they're required to learn these things. I mean, a lot of people are going to get a rude awakening when they realize that NIL rights income is taxable, not only for purposes of federal income tax, but state income tax. And you have to be really careful. If you're an international athlete, some outside the country, you would start earning some of that money. You might be jeopardize your visa. You might be told you've got to go home. And my understanding is student athletes who are on Pell Grants, once you earn a certain amount of money above that, and it's apparently not a very high amount, you lose that. So in some ways, you're going to have to really be careful. And then there certainly needs to be some transparency here. That, hey, here's what the terms of the deal are to make sure it's fair market value. Let me give an example if it doesn't sound too rambling. So let's say that, the star quarterback after freshman year is offered an internship with let's say a financial investment company. And let's say they also have internships that just non-athlete students are getting. So everyone, $10,000 for the summer, but the athlete is offered $100,000. Well, certainly the $10,000 they can get, everyone gets that. And let's say the athlete is going to be used in some commercials for it. And what's the fair market value of that? Let's say maybe another $20,000. But then that additional amount is that, the amount that's over and above what all other students are getting and fair market value for the use of their name, image, and likeness, that would be pay for play. Right. And then the question becomes, well, how are you going to know that? You got to require the student athlete to disclose, here's what I'm getting. You, of course, have to give the NCAA some latitude to police this sort of thing. And the NCAA is saying, well, geez, we could get hit with an antitrust suit, going to have to pay treble damages. And we'd rather use the money that we're taking in to provide, various educational services to student athletes across the board. So, kind of back to your original question, if you're a compliance person or an athletic director, you're sitting there scratching your head, particularly if you're nearing retirement, going, boy, the rules of the games are changing entirely. And I don't even know what the rules are or what they're going to be down the road. So it is a very uncertain time. It is going to be the Wild West for the next couple months, but I'm hoping at least by the end of the year, we can get bipartisan agreement on just the NIL rights. It's probably not going to take too long to realize everyone making their own rules just isn't workable. And I think in Congress, from my discussions with various staff members, they realize, yes, there needs to be uniformity. Yes, there needs to be a very limited safe harbor or antitrust exemption for all of this to be workable. But the real impasse that's resulted is, in general, the Republicans are saying, let's just get an NIL rights bill enacted and take care of that problem. But some on the Democratic side would say, well, NIL rights just is part of a broader federal Bill of Rights for college athletes, which would include things like, making sure that their injuries are taken care of not only while they're playing, but at some point down the road, making sure scholarships, last for, whatever length of time to enable them to get their degree. That's where the real impasse is right now, is that some on the Democratic side are saying, we're not going to agree on NIL rights unless you're agreeing to these other broader issues that we think are important.
Yeah, and that's always the kind of the risk that you play as you're the NCAA asking Congress to do something, because that's kind of how Congress works. You want thing A, things B and C are going to get added along, and there's going to be compromises at some point there. Reading over the Division I Council's recommendations that, like I said, we're recording this Wednesday morning. We expect them to be ratified Wednesday night when they meet. But one of the things that jumped out to me was that student athletes would be allowed to hire or procure a professional services provider to me, as I'm reading that, I'm like, how is that not an agent? I guess you can make a delineation between like a business manager and an agent, but it's like that seems to be another kind of breaking thing that the NCAA is going to say, if these guys are going to be making money, I should say guys and girls are making money off NIL, they can have some type of representation to help them with that.
Yeah, it's always been a fine line. The NCAA would, and again, it's its member schools, historically wanted intercollegiate athletes to have as little contact with agents as possible, because what historically had happened is, agents, meaning those who typically wanted to represent athletes with pro potential in their contract negotiations. It would typically be football and basketball players. There'd be payments under the table, which would violate amateurism rules. Say, hey, if you agree 2-3 years down the road that I'm your agent, I'll give you, X amount of money or use of a car, those sorts of things.
Sure.
So the NCAA took the approach that if you accept anything of value from an agent, or you even agreed down the road to represent them, that invalidated your amateurism eligibility. But the NCAA had always said that you could get advice from a lawyer. So let's take baseball. You come out of high school, Major League Baseball they keep drafting players till no team wants to draft anyone. Right. And then if you're a top baseball player, you get a choice. Do you sign a contract with a major league club? If you do, go through the minor league system and hopefully make it to the pros. Or if you decide not to do that, you can play in college, but then you're not eligible to be drafted again for 3 years. And then now we have football. If you're not eligible to play in the NFL till 3 years have elapsed since your high school class graduated. NBA, it's 1 year. So they were, college athletes were allowed to get advice from advisors, although they weren't, quote, representing you. And this is kind of similar thing here, because and you're right, I think you can call it what you want, service provider or whatever. They're effectively an agent for purposes of NIL rights, because you're going to need someone to determine what is your fair market value, what would exceed that, and then make sure that, there's a contract entered into that complies with all the rules, that the student athlete's rights are protected. And of course, you're going to make sure that intercollegiate athletes aren't getting taken advantage of, because that sometimes happens where someone says, geez, I'm going to take, 50, 60% of it. Or, they'll want to say, well, rather than the money being paid directly to the student athlete, I want it paid to me because I want to make sure I get my cut. And then, as we all know, that money might not ever make it to the way of the student athlete. So that's a really big component of this. We're going to have some sort of regulatory system in place to make sure that there's persons of integrity, good character, and competence providing these services to student athletes, and that they're complying with the rules, which right now are really hard because you don't know what rules apply. You're going to have different rules applying to different student athletes. And, the one question is, let's take basketball player at Wisconsin, the Nigel Hayes, who's from Ohio. Well, Ohio's got an NIL rights law by executive order. Wisconsin doesn't have one. What rules apply to him? And then for purposes of tax, for example, knows he's going to have to pay federal income tax. Let's take a simple example, makes $10,000 endorsement deal. Well, are you paying Wisconsin state income tax or Ohio? And I know that, being from Toledo also imposes a local tax of 2%. Well, how many 17, 18-year-olds are going to be thinking of these things? So you're going to have a business person who can and knows all the legalities to do that. And you just look how you've got intercollegiate athletes. It's basically full time to be a student, to be a athlete. You want to have some sort of social life, and now you're adding this to their plate. I mean, there could really be some adverse unintended consequences to this if you look at it. This is a lot that very young athletes are going to have to deal with. And then the other thing is, a lot of people come from disadvantaged backgrounds, or even those from middle-class backgrounds or things, think what it's like to be that age and all of a sudden you got $100,000 cash and things. And then you're going to have all these people coming out of the woodwork, maybe that girlfriend or boyfriend who wouldn't speak to you. It's like, well, geez, why not? Why don't we get back together now, or that sort of thing. And all these friends you haven't seen for a while, or as some would say, all these uncles come up and say, oh, wow, geez, could you help me out? It's been a tough time. It's just going to be a lot for particularly intercollegiate athletes to deal with, and coaches and compliance people. I tell my students, I said, all of this has created a lot of job opportunities for people interested in sports industry and sports law related employment, because there's just going to be a lot of issues they're going to have to get sorted out.
Matt, I'm totally stealing this question from Colten, who you had it in our rundown, but the thing that interests us is, jersey and merchandise sales. Wisconsin sells jerseys with numbers on them, and those players, of course, are star players. Does the school need to cut the player in now, or does it just completely stop selling jerseys and merchandise? How does any of that work?
Well, it's going to be up to the school, because let's say, at UW or Marquette, they're going to have to come up with their own rules there. And then you would have to look at, what is the scope of protection that Wisconsin provides to name, image, and likeness, or right of publicity. I think you run a risk if you're selling a school jersey, even if it doesn't have the athlete's name on it, it has his or her number, and everybody recognizes that that's who it refers to. So if you run into the problem that if you don't get the student athlete's authorization, that violates their right of publicity. And then the question becomes, well, how do we determine, what's a fair market value rate? What's too much? What's pay for play? And, let's say you got 12 different athletes with different numbers. It's going to vary. The starting quarterback, it's going to be really difficult just to determine that. So the way that it stands now is each school is going to have to figure that out. Maybe the safest course of action for now is to say, we're just not going to sell any jerseys, or at least not any with anyone's number on it. Because clearly the school owns rights to its own trademarks, and that would include the uniform, colors, design, that sort of thing. It's going to be interesting just to see, is the best approach to be cautious, because the more you go out on a limb, so to speak, you really run the risk of problems resulting.
Matt, this has been extremely informational, and I think the thing that's jumped out to me in all this, the compliance people in all of these universities are going to end up being some of the most important people over the next 5-6 months, because they're going to have to interpret rules if they have laws in their state, those laws and how they apply, and if they don't, whatever policy their school comes up with. And I think that's wild for Wisconsin, because there is no state law. They're going to have to make it up on their own on the fly here. And we've seen this week from Graham Mertz, the quarterback, and some other people, like, these kids are ready. On Thursday, they're going to start selling things. They're going to put their names on things. They're ready to go. So I think it's going to be a pretty kind of interesting and just kind of crazy time to watch over the next 5-6 months here.
Well, guys, I think you're exactly right. I mean, it is going to be interesting, shall we speak. I got an invitation yesterday to speak before a group of compliance coordinators, and they had a bunch of questions on this. And I looked at it and said, I don't know how many of these questions I can answer. They're like, well, what educational benefits can you provide? That goes back to Alston. The Supreme Court said, well, NCAA, you can go back and define what you think are education-related benefits, but yet it's subject to the approval of the court. You don't know what the judge is going to do with that.
Right.
So they've got some great questions, but unfortunately, I don't have many answers, and I don't think anyone else does either.
It's crazy. Well, Matt, thank you so much for your time. This has been awesome. Thank you very, very much.
Okay, my pleasure.
All right. Thank you again to Professor Matt Mitten coming in from Marquette and really dropping a lot of knowledge on us there, Jim. I mean, the depth of knowledge he has. I mean, I knew when I emailed him to ask him about jumping on the podcast that he was going to be a good guest because he's so well versed, but you can tell that he sees everything as this whole process and not just like one decision leading to another, Yeah,
I've felt all along, and we've probably used this phrase, but NIL for dummies. In we've trying to, and trying to describe what's going on. And I feel like I'm not calling someone else a dummy. I'm including myself in that, right? I just think there's smarter people out there who can kind of dumb it down for you in a lot of ways. And I thought he did that. I thought there was, his ability to go way back to 1906 and talk about how that was really, how this all started and how some of this stuff dates back to that and just has been kind of a steady climb. I thought he was great. I just thought he provided so much insight that helped me understand the situation a lot better.
Yeah, I think it's kind of wild how all of these cases have, I guess I shouldn't even say cases, because not all of them have reached the Supreme Court, but just all these challenges to the NCAA model and how they've kind of shaped where we're at. Like the meteorites thing in 84 is why all the money has completely exploded in the last 30 years and why, I feel like the athletes have started, or I should say 40 years. I feel like that's part of why the athletes have kind of started to stand up and be like, hey, they're watching us on TV. They're not watching the athletic director or the provost or whoever else. Like the money's to start, hitting the guys on the field. I think it's just, we're entering a situation in college sports where it's going to be looked so dramatically different in less than a year, really. It's going to be within the next year. Things are going to be so different with transferring, the NIL, and everything else that's been in the shift. I think we're not going to recognize quite what college sports have been once we get into 2022. I really don't.
Yeah, I agree. And one thing, we didn't get to this with Matt. We just, can only take up so much of his time. But, one of the follow-ups I was going to ask him is, because he brought up this example, like let's say you have a star athlete that gets some sort of huge endorsement deal, $100,000. Or whatever, just throw any number out there. Let's say that guy gets it at Wisconsin because he's a star, as a sophomore, quarterback, point guard, whatever, right? What if in the following offseason, a school like Alabama in football or Kentucky in basketball comes to him and says, hey, the figure you're getting at Wisconsin in endorsements, we can double that, we can triple that, we can quadruple that, whatever. And now you can transfer one time without penalty. What's to stop this from happening? Like, what's to stop other schools from scooping in? And, Wisconsin already has trouble competing against those schools before.
Yeah, high school recruiting.
Right? What's to stop now from the bigger schools with the bigger boosters from poaching off the second level like Wisconsin or the third level, like the mid majors? It's just unintended consequences, I think is a phrase he used. And I agree with him. And I'm for players getting this right and the ability to earn money off their name, image, and likeness. I really am. But for anybody that can't see that there's going to be problems created by it, I think they're blind to it. It really is. I think it's scary times in a lot of ways, and chaos and uncertainty times in a lot of ways.
Yeah, and to your point, I've never understood why, let's say, a freshman that's a Badger basketball player can't, let's just use a modern example, can't stream video games on Twitch for an audience, but his roommate could, you know what I mean? Like, and there's no issue there. And I just think that the student athletes should be able to go out and do this, but you're totally right because I personally think the NCAA, if they have had these internal discussions years ago, and it really has seemed like in the last 3 years, they've really focused on NIL is going to happen. We've got to get in front of it. And they failed to get in front of it. I mean, if you're, let's say Chris McIntosh is going to start his tenure as AD the first day of NIL, you've got to be kind of terrified that you don't have guide rails from the state as in a state law. You're trying to make sure that your coaches can be competitive in recruiting and know what they can do. But you're going to have to wait until the 11th hour when this board of directors from the NCAA approves this for Division I, and then on the fly figure out, okay, well, Dana Retke, the volleyball player, has got this, and she can do that. But then, somebody on the hockey team's got endorsement X, Y, or Z, and that's actually not okay. We've got to adjust that. So I think it's just going to be a crazy time. And the fact that the NCAA wasn't able to help its schools out in a national way is not to just pile on, because the NCAA is the easiest organization to pile on and everything, but it's just another failure for them to not have gotten this done before some of these state laws came into effect.
One other thing that came up in one of my takeaways he mentioned is, and I think you brought up, is compliance, like the compliance people. So I couldn't help but thinking, like, Katie Smith is the compliance, I think she's the associate AD in terms of in charge of compliance at UW, and already has a really hard job, right? Because compliance is a complicated issue because the NCAA rulebook is so big. There's a lot to deal with in and of itself right now. But now you add this to it, and I can't imagine how much more difficult her job and the people working under her, their jobs, has gotten. Especially when it's one thing to have rules and you have to follow these rules. Now it's like there are no rules in a lot of ways, or there's rules they haven't even considered, and it's hard to, it's going to be so hard to follow along and be in compliance when you don't know what being in compliance necessarily means.
Yeah. At a major school like Wisconsin, I mean, I don't know how that's not a full-time position. Like, compliance with other NCAA rules is going to be one position, then compliance with NIL, especially like with what Matt was saying with the contracts and the taxes and stuff, and making sure these kids aren't going to, find themselves in, trouble with the IRS in 6 months. And are some of these guys going to be independent contractors where they need to be doing this quarterly? Like, it's going to be like, I don't know how you don't make that a whole nother job by itself.
Yeah. No, it's crazy. It's crazy. The other thing we didn't get to with him, and I've talked about writing about this for a while now, is he said, he brought up a really good point in terms of branding and how that might affect team unity because, player A is making thousands and thousands of dollars, player B isn't. And how does that marriage work, right? The other thing is branding in terms of player versus school. Wisconsin a couple years ago essentially changed how they call themselves. Like, the athletic communications department became branding. There's a director of brand strategy. There's a lot of their titles now are branding, right? So there's clearly a brand, which we've known all along. Wisconsin's got a brand, and now they want to kind of advertise that there's a brand. I get it. But now players are going to want their own brands, and do those brands conflict with each other? Wisconsin's an Under Armour school. What if players get deals to wear a Nike shirt or something, right? How does that work? And how do you stop that? How do you not allow that? It's just, there's so many questions. And I feel like here we are, I don't know. We're right now, it's June 30th. This kicks in on July 1st, and there's so much uncertainty that I don't know how this is going to work. I really don't. It's so bizarre.
Yeah, I know in a lot of the proposals from the Power Five conference and the NCAA to Congress for these rules, that specific example that you mentioned with the apparel stuff has been hey, if we're an Under Armour school, like, our student athletes can't sign an endorsement deal with Nike or Adidas or whatever the other competitor might be. But I don't know if that's going to stand up. I don't know if that's going to be ratified by the NCAA by the time that all this starts. It's going to be wild. And, before we move on to this, because we have a couple of things we want to talk about before we wrap up today, I wanted to ask you, because Graham Mertz, quarterback for the Badgers, came out this week with a trademark logo. Immediately, I started seeing comments that, that looks like this logo. Like, there's a gaming company, and then there's another one. It's like, is the school going to protect or going to help Graham Mertz fight if he were to somehow end up in a copyright dispute, or like he's got to go get his own lawyer? I mean, there is just so many layers to all this. And on top of it, it's like, I'm not a logo expert, but I get that it's supposed to be a G and an M, but like, why is the M on top? That's your last name. I was so confused by all that, Jim. I was lost.
Yeah, and as someone who doesn't really completely understand branding, and like, I'm a guy that hates tweeting out my stories because I just, it feels somewhat icky to promote myself in that manner. And I know that sounds stupid probably because I certainly want people to read my stuff, right? But I've always been a little bit uncomfortable promoting stuff on social media. So yeah, it's just the idea of branding is a difficult subject for me to embrace and understand in general. And it's just, there's a lot to this, is that from a complete outsider in this mess, it's fascinating. It really is.
It really is. So let's transition from that to promoting ourselves.
Yes.
Jim has a great story that you guys should go on madison.com right now and read about Barry Alvarez. We mentioned that Chris McIntosh is going to take over today. You guys are listening to this on Thursday. So he takes over as AD today. So Barry Alvarez's tenure as a Wisconsin AD is over. Jim, your story was really cool in that it talks a lot about where Barry Alvarez is from. And I think there are some people that kind of run away from where they're from, or they've kind of made that something that won't define them or doesn't kind of jive with who they want to be. I think Barry Alvarez is the complete opposite of that, where he saw where he's from, what he is. He saw elements of it, like, the dedication to hard work and all that type of stuff. But it was like, I'm not doing it this way. I'm not going into the coal mines, like, bump that. And I think that's really kind of defined him. I think you did a good job in your story explaining that and kind of fleshing that out.
Yeah, and not to give away too much of the story, because I really want people to read it, and they're going to need some time because it's a long story. But I thought the way I started my story was for a reason. Like, Chris McIntosh, who's taken over Barry Alvarez and played under him, had heard these stories, right? He had heard all these stories of the lunch pail mentality and the blue collar work ethic and all that stuff. He'd heard them used as metaphors. But in 2019, they both were out in Pittsburgh for the NCAA volleyball Final Four. Wisconsin won semifinal. They had a day to burn, and Barry's like, "Let's go for a ride. It's 25. My house, where I grew up, is 25 miles away. Let's go for a ride." And I think that was fascinating for Chris McIntosh to see. He had heard the metaphors. He got to spend a day kind of seeing what Barry Alvarez meant. And as we all know, like, seeing is way, someone can paint a picture for you, but until you see the picture yourself, I think it's so important. So that was just kind of the way of getting into the story. And there's a lot in there. Barry was generous enough to give me, probably over an hour of his time in 2 separate sessions. McIntosh, I think I talked to for 45 minutes. Cindy Alvarez invited me over to her house, and we spoke for close to an hour. I talked to one of Barry's old college teammates, who's now a really close friend. So I think those, all those people kind of helped form a picture. Listen, I've been around this business for 20 years. And when I was assigned this story back in April, part of me was like, what can you possibly write about Barry Alvarez that people haven't read? And I went to our editors at one point, Rachel Crater and Kevin Morris, and I was like, you guys are relative outsiders in terms of you haven't been working in this market for a long time. Let's kind of brainstorm here. What do you want to know? What does someone who hasn't read all the stories want to know? And so that's kind of how we settled on a concept of, where does the swagger come from? How does he able to kind of pass that confidence on to others? And that was a good leaping off point. I thought the story came together nice in just terms of, I thought I covered a lot of ground. It's almost 100 inches. I covered a lot of ground, but I hope people enjoy it and kind of get a better understanding for a guy who has been just, I can't say enough, so monumental in terms of where this program is now, where this department is now compared to where it was 31 and a half years ago when he arrived.
Yeah. And to that point, I was able to, in part of our kind of leading up to Barry Alvarez's last day here, I was able to talk to 8 people that either played for him, lots of people that played for him, but worked with him in different capacities and coached with him. And a series of essays I've been running on madison.com and in our paper the last week or so. And the thing that jumped out to me the most talking to all these guys is, whether you're talking about a Paul Christ that's been with him in multiple capacities as an assistant coach, as a head coach in his department, or a guy like Calvin Barrett, who wasn't a star, or a Ron Dane, who won a Heisman Trophy for him. It struck me just the relationships that Barry Alvarez maintained with a lot of these guys, and the way that Calvin Barrett kind of described it, and I think really summed it up well, was Barry Alvarez has this ability to see potential in people and get it out of them, that's pretty different. I mean, in a way, that's what coaching is, right? You're trying to evaluate people and then push them to where you see them. But Barry Alvarez is able to do that both personally and as a coach in a way that really bonded these guys to him. And you listen to a guy like Ron Dane talk about him, or, Troy Vincent, who played for him for, a season or 2 seasons. But I mean, 30 years ago, and they're still super tight. And Troy calls him, one of the most influential men in his life. It's really just a testament to the bonds that they were able to create and the way that they've maintained it over these years.
He's just got this charisma that oozes out of him, and it's not BS, right? I just think that maybe your initial reaction to it is that it's BS, but then you listen and see that it works. It's worked pretty much everywhere he's gone. And I think that's important. Like, McIntosh was talking to me about the word alignment, how you're sold something in recruiting, and then you show up for practice and you see it play out, and then it just continues. The process just continues, and you end up understanding that, hey, what he was saying in recruiting is exactly the same now. He wasn't selling, something that's something that's not. What he said he meant, and he's carrying forward with a plan. It worked as an administrator too. He would hire people, tell them what the job was, get out of their way, and then hold them accountable, certainly, but not micromanage. And he said this too, like, I don't think this wasn't in my story, but he likes to hire people that are smarter than him. He likes to hire people who are anal, because he's not anal. He's a in a lot of ways, like Cindy Alvarez had a great line. She's like, when you talk to him, how long did you talk to him? I'm like, well, first interview was 30 minutes. She's like, yeah, that's about it. Like, you shouldn't go past 30 minutes, because he'll lose interest, and he has his attention span will just cut out on you. So I'm like, oh, that's a really good idea. 30 minutes is probably where I'll stop future interviews with him if I ever do that. And so, I think that was, he knows his, I don't know if that's a flaw, but he knows his strengths and weaknesses, and he hires people who play to those weaknesses. People who will make up for those perceived weaknesses. So he's a really good leader, and that's been proven over and over 3 decades. And look what he's done.
For sure. All right, so guys, make sure you go out and check that out on madison.com. All those stories are there, and then also one coming that you guys should be able to read by Thursday morning on Chris McIntosh, as he takes over this department. And as we've been talking about all podcasts, some pretty wild times. So make sure you guys go check that out as well. Want to wrap up the show here, just a little bit of recruiting talk. It's been kind of a busy couple of weeks for the Badgers football team with recruiting. And this isn't all too unexpected, because when the NCAA lifted their in-person recruiting ban June 1st, lots of these kids were making their first official visits. And I mean, it's been every weekend. The Badgers have had a dozen or so guys on campus for unofficial or official visits. They've had some camps that have led to a couple of commitments as well. The big one that happened on Tuesday was Joe Bruner from Whitefish Bay, the offensive lineman, #1 guy in the state, and a 4-star recruit, one of the top tackles in the country. Not that it's surprising, Jim, that Wisconsin was able to land an in-state offensive lineman, but I think it is notable that I think he's going to be one of those kind of linchpin recruits. They've had the quarterback committed for a long time, Miles Barquette. You've got this kid, Tommy McIntosh from Michigan, that committed as a wide receiver. I think is really intriguing. A couple of defensive backs, but you continue to load up on the offensive line. Really the hallmark of this program and the basis of this offense. But Joe Bruner and other guys like Carson Hinsman, Billy Schroth out there as well. I think he could be one of those guys that, all right, Joe Bruner's going there now. All right, let's all get committed and let's get rolling here. And the Badgers kind of might be able to have their class kind of basis set by the end of July, I think.
Yeah, you're right. A momentum builder, kind of get the ball rolling. And we've seen this play out over the years where they do get a lot of their stuff done early. This year, I don't know what I expect. Like, you and I talked a month or two ago, and it was like, they don't have many recruits. And I think we knew why. Like, we knew that it had been odd for a lot of kids to jump on board without at least stepping foot on campus. and seeing the place. And, so I kind of, I really appreciate the fact that those kids waited and didn't commit too early. But now that they have this isn't surprising to see play out. And it's, it's kind of the way this program's operated the last few years, that there seems to be a summer swing of momentum usually. And then it just keeps building and building and building. And who knows, I wouldn't be shocked if in December, when the early signing period rolls around, if they've put together yet another really, really impressive class, because they've stacked a couple already on top of each other. And this one seems to be headed in that direction as well.
Right. And I think, not that I don't put a ton of stock into the team recruiting rankings when we're talking about in July or in June. But it was just very funny to me how you add Joe Bruner to the group and get it up to 9 right now. And it goes from about 50 on all the major sites to in the mid 30s. So that could just gives you a little bit of indication of how significant and how highly regarded Joe Bruner is as a recruit here. So make sure you're on madison.com checking those stories out as well, because we've got a collection of all the recruits that are committed already. Get all the facts you need to know about them there. And then Jim's got more columns coming up. I'll
have one Thursday morning. I'll have one on Chris McIntosh. It's first day. I don't know where it's going yet as of 10 o'clock on Thursday. I've got some ideas on what I want to do. But I talked to Barry a little bit more about McIntosh. And so certainly I've got some leftover stuff. So there's a column there. I just don't know what it is yet, but I'll have that. I'll probably have one more column this weekend, TBD. And then I'd leave for vacation. I've got some stuff in the works that's going to run while I'm on vacation, I believe, or shortly after I return from vacation. So part of this next week for me is just scramble mode, trying to get everything finished before I leave town. But I need a vacation, and
yes,
it comes at a good time. So I'm sprinting towards the finish line here.
Absolutely. Sounds great. Jim, have a great 4th of July. I love 4th of July. Side note. This is
okay.
Besides Christmas, I would say 4th of July is my favorite holiday.
Because of the fireworks, or tell me why?
No, it's mostly because it's usually nice out. My friends and I always do something. Like I'm going to my buddy's house for the weekend. A couple of us are joining up. We're all either engaged or married now. So like our wives are into it too, and they're all friends. But I don't know. 4th of July was always just a big thing growing up for me, and it's kind of maintained that in adulthood now, and I love it. Love 4th of July.
We're not really doing anything formally for the holiday. We're actually going to see my mom, who's moving out of the house that I grew up in. So it's kind of a bittersweet weekend for me. Yeah. It's like, not to show vulnerability here, but seriously, it's so that's what I'll be doing. I'll help her kind of put the finishing touches on moving and say goodbye to the house I grew up in. So it's going to be a weekend. It's going to be something.
For sure. Absolutely, man. All right. Well, thank you guys so much for listening. Jim won't be back next week because he'll be vacationing, but maybe we'll have Abby on. You guys can get to know our new Badger basketball beat reporter a little bit more. So thank you guys very much for listening.